So should prostitution be legalized? Well, yeah, um, but that's not an endorsement. Um, the idea that prostitution is some kind of valid occupation is the literal victory of neo-liberalism that assigns every behavior a monetized value. It's the strongest possible endorsement of capitalism. When you hear this argument when you hear it on the right, it makes sense. No leftist will argue in favor of legal prostitution, and like that it should be like a service that's offered and taxed and regular. That's not left wing. Okay, nobody on the left would ever argue for that. And if you hear that argument, you know that it's really coming from capitalists, right? That person would have to be a capitalist. There's no, and like this goes right back, right? I mean, I'm going to say some things and I may upset some people, but I mean, what I'm saying is, it's written in Marx, it's written in Proudhon. Like it's at the crux, the core, the very basic of the left-wing position of things, okay? If you want to take a capitalist position on prostitution, go ahead. And the capitalist position on prostitution is that it should be unregulated. Do that, but understand what you're doing. Okay, don't pretend that you're taking some left-wing position, because you're really not. So, I do oppose prostitution laws, but I also oppose prostitution. Okay, I don't think you should put prostitutes in jail. Okay, I don't think you should fine them. This is not the way you deal with this problem. But it is a problem. Okay, it's not something that we should just turn our heads to. But we shouldn't put them in jail. Okay? I don't oppose prostitution laws because I think the exchange of sex is a valid market interaction. I am not a capitalist. I oppose prostitution laws because they are ineffective in abolishing prostitution. You want to talk about, creating goods and exchanging them, that's one thing. You want to talk about selling, sexuality, that's not. You can't have this discussion outside of the context of a society where everything is reduced to having a price. Like I say, it is the most extreme type of capitalism that talks about prostitution as an acceptable thing to exchange on a market. Most people that are not capitalists see the situation very differently. They have a hard time understanding the idea that somebody would go out of their way to sell their body to strangers for pleasure. That doesn't. I mean, that would be a very intriguing type of masochism, one would think, right? And so taking a more realistic position about prostitution, which is that it's a negative consequence of a market society, we need to look at ways that we can solve the problem of prostitution. And what are the effective solutions to this? Well, you need to get to the root causes, which are largely related to the enforcement of wage slavery. We live in a society where most people have no choice but to sell some abstraction of their labor in order to survive. Prostitutes are people that sell sex in order to survive. Largely. Mostly. Okay? Just like, people that work in a fast food restaurant are there not because they want to be there, but because they have to be there, because they have rent to pay. They have to pay the capitalists. They have to pay the rentier class. They are forced by the market to do things against their will. That is the reality of prostitution for most people. Okay, so this isn't a moral issue, and you'll notice that I didn't say anything at all about the morality of it. Okay, this is an issue of markets, and this is an issue of coercion, and this is an issue of free choice. And you can't talk about women making, or men, making free decisions in the context of a market society. Okay, there's no such thing as a free choice in a market society because you constantly have all of these coercive forces that are, making you make choices against your will in order to appease the rentier class. That said, I mean, what's the difference, right? You want to work on the corner, you want to work at the McDonald's, what's the difference? So I would consider it oppressive to restrict an individual's choice in who exactly it is that they wish to whore themselves out to, but that's not an acceptance of prostitution. That's an indictment of wage labor. So we often hear this idea that prostitution is the same as every other job. It should be respected the same way as any other job, but the anarchist perspective flips that around. All wage labor is prostitution and should be equally marginalized. So no, being a prostitute isn't different than working fast food, but that comparison doesn't put prostitution in a more favorable light. It puts a fast food worker in a more negative light. If we want a really free society, we have to give everybody the opportunity to make choices isolated from the social coercion of market forces. We have to remove the slavery of a market economy before we can talk about whether people are really making real choices. There's no agency in a market economy. Okay, that's nonsense. Before we can talk about agency and choice, we have to give people the opportunity to make those choices. And so how do we do that? Well, we can have we need universal access to education. Okay, that's a prerequisite. Before we can talk about whether prostitution is a free choice and whether the people are doing it or not, we have to have universal access to education systems first. We have to have guaranteed annual incomes first. We have to have livable social welfare for marginalized groups like single mothers first. And we have to have a federally mandated living wage first. Once we get all of those things in place, then we can talk about whether prostitution is a choice or not. Until those things exist, we can't. Just like we can't talk about whether, working at the McDonald's is a choice. And if you go and talk to the people that work at the McDonald's, most of them will tell you that it's not really a choice. Okay? Those things will not abolish prostitution outright, but they will restrict to those that really choose it out of the enjoyment of sex. And then, who's to judge, right? It's your choice to be a slut or not. And if you're really into it, nobody has the right to tell you not to. Okay? But that's not what the law and the society should be focusing on. Okay? People are going to do what they want anyways. What the society needs to focus on are people that are doing or are engaging in sex work because of the economic climate is forcing them to. And the perspective on the real left is not, how do we abolish the, get the state out of people's lives. That's not what the real left is interested in here. What the real left is interested in is abolishing the coercive economic forces that coerce women into doing things that they don't really want to. And if you talk to them, they'll say, well, if you take this away from me, then I won't be able to pay my rent, or I won't be able to see my kids, or some other thing like that, right? And that may be true, okay? But that's no justification for prostitution. That's an indictment of capitalism. So people need to be very careful. Okay, this is one of those issues where a lot of capitalists masquerade on the left, and a lot of people that call themselves leftists really aren't, and you get this sort of confusion here, right? Okay, what I'm telling you here is, and these comparisons, they go back centuries. It's right at the core of the left, and this is what I'm saying to you here is what the left actually believes. If you have some other perspective, you might want to think about reconsidering how it is that you label yourself. You're probably a market liberal, right? A liberal capitalist. That's what I find most people's perspective of this on. And when I say that this is the strongest possible endorsement of capitalism, when you talk to a lot of people that pretend they're on the left, okay, that's what ends up coming out on this particular issue, is that they really are very much in favor of a market economy where people monetize, little bits and pieces. Another thing that in this category is the idea of paid housework. Paid housework makes no sense in any other system besides hyper liberalism, right? Besides the most extreme type of capitalism. If we ever get to a point where we have paid housework, we'll be in the purest, most extreme form of capitalism that has ever existed. But somehow that ends up on the left, right? It's a lot of confusion, a lot of fuzzy thinking, a lot of cognitive dissonance. So yes, the left will oppose prostitution laws because this isn't an issue of criminality. This is an issue of economic inequality. And the solution is not to put, victims of an unjust hierarchy in jail. It's to approach the hierarchy and to approach, the inequalities that have created the problem in the first place, right? But don't confuse that with somebody that's in favor of, trying to create a business model out of prostitution, okay? That opens up a whole new level of victimization. It solves nothing. It makes the problem worse.